the attempt was to try different definition of aggressive and benign course, and the biological scientific rationale was started from previous epidemiological observation, based on which we learned that experiencing progressive symptoms in MS is strongly age-related. By the time that patients grows older, they are more exposed to progression, and it's a proportional effect. By the time people grow by age, they also become much more likely to become progressive, either to experience a secondary progressive form of the disease or a primary progressive form of the disease. So the question we posed we investigated the London, Ontario dataset, which is a large dataset of natural history data. Nowadays is considered an historic dataset because it's been taken over by a large amount of, especially MS-based, all the other registry. But the peculiarity of the London, Ontario dataset is that all patients never receive any disease-modifying treatment, and they were followed up for a very long time, average 28 years. So it's a long observation of the disease, not spoiled by any treatment, that can truthfully reflect the natural history of MS. And so what we wanted to explore in the dataset was what happened to those people that quite unusually they exhibit symptoms of progression despite being young. Given that most of the time progression occurs at old age, what when it happens at young age? So we define those subgroup of patients as a young progressors, and we use a cutoff. We base our selection on the age and onset of progression, either primary or secondary progression. We look at the 25th percentile, the youngest one. So we identify a subgroup of young progressors who became progressive unusually before the age of 33. That was the cutoff. And we wanted to look at retrospectively what happened to the young progressor. So they became progressor, they exhibited progressive symptoms at a young age. And when we look at the way they accumulated disability, it was much faster than the general population. They reached disability endpoint, EDSS 6, 8, and 10 in a much shorter time compared to. So they really had a very aggressive disease course. And one of the most reliable clinical indicators for becoming a young progressor and then eventually experiencing rapid accumulation of disability was the time they took to reach EDSS-3, which is a milestone disability outcome implying a moderate accumulation of disability. So the time that they took to reach EDSS-3 since the onset dictated the tempo and the probability of becoming a young progressor and eventually to experience an aggressive disease course. So we built up a model that, based on the time they reach EDSS-3, in addition to the age at onset, calculate in a reliable way the risk for a young progressor to be a young progressor. It's a risk that can be calculated within the first 5 years of the disease. And it's important because it allows to identify in advance those patients who are destined to become young progressor, having an aggressive course, and therefore should be treated aggressively in order to try to avoid reaching that level of disability. But in the same study, we also look at the opposite extreme of the age-related outcome. So we look at what happened to those people who actually don't develop a progressive course despite growing older. And we call them young relapsers. So we use the widely used definition of late onset MS, and we identify in the London, Ontario database those patients who became 50 years or older, and yet they were still having relapsing-remitting symptoms and not progressive symptoms. And interestingly, among those who were still relapsing after the age of 50, 10 years later, half of the patients became secondary progressive, but half of them remained relapsing-remitting and then were follow-up until another age of 70. So without experiencing any secondary progressive symptoms. And indeed, the whole outcome, the general outcome of the disease was very benign. They didn't accumulate much disability. And again, they were distinguished. A good clinical indicator was the time they reached the EDSS free at the beginning of the disease. So, of course, in contrast to the young progressors, the old relapsers took a very long time to reach EDSS free. And that's distinguished them. And this could be a good indicator for avoiding exposing these people who are destined to have a milder disease course to treatment, which is not needed and necessary.